Today in our gospel, we find ourselves, Jesus and his apostles, in a place called Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is an ancient city that dates back to the year 300 BC or so. It was named Caesarea Philippi for a couple of reasons. First of all, the father of Alexander the Great, who conquered the Persian Empire. He was a Greek who came over. Alexander the Great's father's name was Philip. He had named that special place after his dad. The Caesarea part of the name of the city that they're in is named after the great Caesar Augustus, who ruled from 27 BC all the way to 4 AD. He was known as the one who expanded and consolidated the power of the Roman Empire and gave it its firm ground that would last 500 years after. The place itself was a place where they believed that the gods resided, because on Mount Hermon, there, about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, there was a face cliff, an escarpment, an outcropping, in which were carved little niches where the god Pan was worshipped. Pan's dad was Hermes, one of the Greek gods, but Pan is the god of everything. If you have ever heard of pantheism, it means that God is not transcendent, God's just the universe. So Pan was the god of everything. It's actually where we get our word panic. So panic, make the connection there. So it was a place where people would go in order to offer worship and sacrifice to God. And the place was not only a place where many deities they thought resided, but it was also a place that had an enormous cave in the ground, and out of that cave was a spring of water. That water contributed as one of the greatest contributors of the Jordan River. They believed that that cave was actually the entrance to the underworld. The ancient people believed that. They believed that that was the entrance to hell or Hades or Sheol, whatever you call it, depending on which religious tradition you were part of. And they would actually throw their sacrifices of bread, of food, into that cave, hoping to placate the god Pan, because on this huge rock face, storms would even come over that would have thunder and lightning, and they believed that if you didn't satisfy the gods, that they would strike you with lightning. So it's no accident that Jesus brings his apostles to this place, named after two great kings, two great emperors, or at least associated with two great conquering kings in the recent history of the world, and a place where gods had resided. Even Alexander the Great and great Caesar Augustus considered themselves sort of divine beings because of what they were able to do in their conquest. And so it is no accident that Jesus brings his apostles to this particular location and asks them this singular question: who do people say that I am? In the midst of the crowds coming and going, worshiping this god Pan in this place named after these great human conquerors who are no more, he asked them the question, who do people say that I am? Notice, first of all, how strange that question is. If you've ever heard of any other religious founders, which I'm sure you've had, Confucius, Buddha, Martin Luther, anything from the beginning of the world until present, most people are going to say, well, how do you like my teaching? What do you think of my philosophy? No religious leader, and I say it to their credit, would ever ask themselves of their followers, who do people say that I am? There certainly have been people in recent history, even in our country, thinking the Branch Davidians, for example, in the 80s, who David Koresh had considered himself a god, but he didn't last very long. So when Jesus takes his apostles to this particular location and asks them the question, who do people say that I am? He did it intentionally, this particular location. And Peter gets the answer correct. I say you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah, the one that we've been waiting for. And unlike any of those people that the city was named after, unlike any of the gods who they worshipped in those places, this Jesus, this Christ, would not rule by fear. He would not rule by conquering lands. He would rule from a cross and convince people not with leverage but with love. He would not order people to sacrifice others for placating him. He would not ask or tell people to kill in order to advance his kingdom, but he would ask, as he did himself, to die for it. The question that Jesus presented to his apostles is the question that we have to ask for ourselves. Who do you say that Jesus is? Who do you say that Jesus is? And the answer to that question, friends, should dictate everything that you do in your life. C.S. Lewis once said that either Jesus is the Lord, the one through whom all things were created, or he is a lunatic, or he's a liar. If Peter is right, then he is in fact God incarnate, come down to save us from our sins. If he's not, he thought he was God and is crazy. And we can all go home, because it's all a sham. Or we believe that he was simply lying about it. But the problem is, if he claims to be Christ, he either is telling the truth or he's lying. But then again, he rose from the dead. So we have no real choice, friends, in the matter to either believe that Jesus is Lord as Peter confesses him to be, or we have no purpose in our faith anymore. Peter gets the answer right. But the trouble is, Peter's concept of what a king should be comes from a very earthly mentality, which is why Jesus says, you are not thinking as God does, but as men do. Where is Caesar? Dead, buried. Where's his kingdom? In ruins. Where is Philip and his son Alexander? They're no more. Where are their kingdoms? They're split up into a bunch of territories even today. Where are the gods Pan? So when Jesus says to Peter, on this rock I will build my church, and he says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, he could just have easily been pointing toward that hole in the ground with that source of water coming out and said, the gates of hell, the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And as my mother would often remind us, implicit in that comment is that the gates of hell would try. Friends, as Catholics, you belong to a church that has a 2,000-year tradition. And from enemies both without and within, it has survived the test of time. The successor of Caesar, where is he? The successor of Philip and Alexander, where are they? The successor of Peter, he's in Rome. His name is Pope Francis. He's still there. I know there's a lot in the media and stuff. We say we undermine the authority and stuff like that. But even Peter, the first pope, got something wrong, which is why Jesus scolds him in the gospel today. But the succession continues in Rome. And it will continue until Jesus comes again. So the question, friends, is, who is Jesus? Who do you say that he is? And, as a king, will you let him conquer your heart? Will you let him conquer your heart? If he is your king, then you will let him do that for you. What does Jesus save us from? I'm fond of the simple answer. Jesus saves us from ourselves. Jesus saves us from, what we call sin. Jesus saves us from turning in on ourselves, from seeking happiness, from self-gratification, from seeking our own power, our own pleasure, our own honor. And he turns us out, as he did with his son on the cross, to love. That's the point. But he first has to conquer his territory, which is you and I. So friends, today we think deeply about that question, especially as we receive ourselves in the Lord, receive the Lord at the Eucharistic table, at the altar. His succession plan and his presence among us, again, is right here on the altar and has been for the last 2,000 years. We could read accounts at this Mass of the first Masses in the first century, and you would hear very little difference between what we're doing here and what they did 2,000 years ago, 20 years after Jesus rose from the dead. And friends, we should be grateful to be here today and to be part of that succession.